They'd planned it for months. The route was remote, scenic, and, most importantly, almost entirely unknown to tourists. Callum had found the path on a cycling forum buried 3 pages deep in a thread titled Routes. That should be illegal. It cut through the Dinaric Alps just along the Bosnian-Croatian border. No phone coverage, no traffic, no towns for 30 kilometers at a time. Pure, uninterrupted wilderness. That's what made it perfect. Callum and his best friend Milo had been cycling together since university. Now in their early 30s, they'd grown into the kind of friendship that didn't need talking to be comfortable. Milo was quieter, more analytical. Callum was the risk-taker, the voice that said yes before knowing what the question was. This trip was his idea. The morning they left the small mountain lodge near Blydench Lake, the sky was the kind of pale blue that felt too fragile to last. Plus, hovered at the peaks like waiting predators. Still, the trail was dry. They cycled uphill for hours, navigating sharp gravel bends and pine-slicked paths. Around noon, the sun ducked behind a wall of mist and didn't come back. "Shouldn't we check the barometer?" Milo asked, pausing to sip from his pack. Callum waved it off. "It's June. A little fog doesn't mean anything. We're ahead of schedule anyway." But as they crested the ridge around 3:30 p.m., the trail began its long descent, and so did the weather. The fog thickened until trees were just silhouettes, and the temperature dropped with every meter downhill. Dense, wet cold. The kind that seeps past layers of waterproof gear and clamps onto bone. "Visibility's crap," Milo muttered, pulling his neck gaiter. "We should find a place to camp early." Callum didn't argue. The descent was treacherous. Rock, sudden switchbacks, and cliffs that disappeared into the mist on there. Every crunch of gravel under tires sounded amplified, echoing like gunfire. They spotted an old hunting cabin just before dusk, a low, lopsided structure with a sagging roof and shuttered windows. To sit in a thicket of dying fir trees, half swallowed by undergrowth. Abandoned clearly, but intact. No sign of wildlife. No boot prints or tire marks. "Creepy as hell," Milo said. "Better than a tent in this weather." Inside, it smelled of mold and old ash. The fireplace was filled with soot, but the chimney looked open. A rat skittered across the far corner. There were a few dusty pots hanging from rusted hooks, a cot with broken springs, and a table with 2 mismatched chairs. No electricity, no insulation, but shelter all the same. They unpacked in silence, working efficiently. Milo lit the fire. Callum checked his GPS. It was flickering, unreliable in the cloud cover. No signal. No surprise. Around 9 p.m., they were warmed up and fed. Milo leaned back against the cabin wall, eyes half-lidded. Callum was reading from a torn paperback he'd found tucked under the cot, some trashy thriller about a killer in the woods. He read aloud in mock horror. Then a sound. Outside. Both froze. It hadn't been wind. Not an animal either. The step. Deliberate. Crunch. Fuzz. Another. They looked at each other. Milo slowly reached for the hatchet near the fireplace. Callum crept to the window and peeked through the shutter slats. Nothing but fog. "Still, maybe just an animal," Milo whispered. Callum didn't answer. Then came a knock. 3 taps on the door. No voice. No footsteps retreating. Just a knock and silence. Milo gripped the hatchet tighter. "This a joke?" Callum's mouth was dry. "Not from me." Another knock. Slower this time. They waited. Breath shallow. Muscles clenched. Minutes. No more sound. Callum finally moved, bolting the door with the old iron. They didn't sleep much that night. But it wasn't until morning, when they stepped outside to pack their bikes, that they saw it. In the soft, wet earth outside the cabin door, one perfect bare footprint. Not a boot. Not a shoe. Just a single human footprint. Fresh. And pointing toward the door. Callum stared at the footprint like it might vanish if he blinked. But it didn't. The toes, the arch, the heel, all crisp. Clearly a man's, judging by the size and depth. Yet it was barefoot. In alpine forest. Near zero temperatures. Milo crouched beside it, not saying a word. He ran his fingers just over the edge of the imprint, not touching the middle. His breath came out in visible bursts. Do you think he's still around? Milo asked quietly. Callum didn't answer. He scanned the treeline. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had thickened with the morning, dragging low and wet like a damp cloth over the world. The trees were barely visible past 20 feet. The whole forest seemed to hum, not with sound, but with silence. The absence of birdsong was what really hit Milo. Not a chirp. Not a rustle. The woods had taken a breath in and hadn't let it out. They packed quickly. Callum suggested they continue the route, get to the next village on the map, Zaselj, a small cluster of homes. About 15 kilometers southeast. Don't you think we should turn back? Milo asked. Someone knocked. In the middle of nowhere. And left that. He motioned toward the footprint. And if we go back, we just have to pass that ridge again. No thanks. I'd rather go forward than climb blind in this weather. Please. Downhill's faster. Milo hesitated, but followed. They cycled in silence, wheels crunching over damp gravel. The fog wavered, sometimes thinning just enough to reveal spindly trees, other times closing in so tight they could barely see each other. The descent turned into a narrow path alongside a steep drop. The terrain was slick and tense with hidden roots and loose rocks. Every sound seemed louder, branches snapping. Somewhere unseen, distant shifting of something in the brush. Around noon, they found an old wooden trail sign. The lettering had worn down to barely legible grooves. But the arrow still pointed vaguely down the path. That's when they saw him. At first, Milo thought it was a trick of the fog, just a dark shape, human-sized, ahead on the trail. Then it moved. A man. He stood facing away from them, maybe 50 meters ahead. He wasn't wearing shoes. His feet were pale, smeared with mud. He wore pants, but no shirt. His skin was pale, sickly even. His head was shaved or maybe just bald. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing. Callum, Milo whispered. Callum. Stop. Callum saw him too. His hands tightened on the handlebars. He's not moving. They waited. 10 seconds. 30. Then the man tilted his head, like he was listening for something behind him. The movement was smooth, deliberate. Not curious, like an animal catching a scent. Milo felt his throat constrict. Reverse, he muttered. Now. Callum didn't argue this time. They turned the bikes and pedaled uphill, retracing back toward the last fork in the trail. Milo kept glancing back. The man hadn't followed. But every turn of the pedals made the air feel thicker, heavier, like they were pushing through more than just fog. At the fork, they took the other path, narrower, less the kind that hadn't seen a vehicle in years. They hoped it would reconnect with the main trail below. For a while, it was quiet again. Too quiet. Milo thought of birds again. The complete absence of life. That's when they found the second cabin. This one was newer, well kept, tucked against a slope with a small wooden porch and a tin chimney. A motorcycle leaned against the side, rusted but intact. The front door was open. Milo looked at Callum. We should check it. If anyone's here. Callum didn't wait. He stepped inside. It was empty, neatly kept. Some dry goods stacked in the corner. A kettle still on the wood-burning stove, though cold. Slumped on the floor. A pair of boots by the door. They didn't belong to the man they'd seen. Callum bent down and unzipped the bag. Inside were clothes. A wallet. He pulled it out and opened it. The ID was local. The name, Petr Vukovic. The photo was recent. Early 40s. Scruffy beard. Then Milo called out from the other room. "You need to see this." Callum followed him to the back wall. A small corkboard hung. There, pinned with hand-drawn maps, newspaper clippings in Bosnian, and a row of photographs. Grainy shots of the same barefoot man, standing in different parts of the forest, always shirtless, always facing away. One headline stuck out: Neslazbin price o Kovjiku. Koji Nikada eni Salatsi Uselo. Unofficial reports of a man who never comes down to the village. Another, Nestansi Ublazini Jalovi Dolini Stari. Mitovi o Najdni. Disappearances near Jalova Valley and the old myths of the Watcher. Callum looked at Milo, who was already pale. "Let's go," Milo said. And that's when they heard it. Footsteps on the porch. The floorboards creaked under their feet as they froze. Neither of them spoke. The air inside the cabin had changed, charged with something sharp and instinctual, like a pulled muscle before a sprint. Callum's hand slowly reached for the fire poker near the stove. Milo scanned for exits, heart in his throat. Then, another step on the porch. Whoever was outside wasn't in a rush. They weren't trying to break in. But they weren't leaving either. Each step was deliberate, spaced. Not searching. Waiting. Milo crept to the window and peeled back the edge of the curtain. At first, he saw nothing but fog and pine. Then the figure emerged. Slowly. As if the fog was giving birth to it. The same man. Shirtless. Pale skin now smudged with streaks of dirt or ash. He stood at the edge of the porch, not quite at the door. Head tilted. Arms hanging limp by his sides. "He's not looking at us," Milo whispered. "He's just standing." Callum's voice was low, tense. "There's a back door. The pantry." They moved fast, barely making a sound. Through the narrow corridor into the pantry, stocked with canned beans, pickles, jam, and out the low back door into the underbrush. They didn't stop to check if he'd seen them. They just ran. Leaving their bikes, their gear, everything but the essentials, wallets, phones. A power bar stuffed into Callum's jacket pocket. The forest behind the cabin was tighter, less a trail and more a scattering of deer paths and wild undergrowth. Fog clung to every branch. Moss muted their footfalls. But it also muted everything else. Quiet. Their own panting seemed intrusive. They ran until they couldn't. Bent over, breathless, Callum finally stopped near a gnarled tree stump that had rotted into a jagged mouth. "We need to find high ground," he gasped. "Got bearings." Milo nodded, hands on his knees. His body was shaking. Whether from adrenaline or cold, he wasn't sure. "That guy. He's not right. Something's wrong with him. The way he moves." Callum held up a hand. Somewhere behind them, maybe 100 meters away, a branch snapped. Milo didn't look back. "Keep moving." They headed upslope, toward a steep ridge that promised a view, if they could make it. Climbing was slow. The forest thinned near the top. But the fog didn't. It was worse here, thicker, wetter. The trees creaked in the windless air, like old bones settling. When they reached the crest, they found not a clearing but something else. A circle of stones. Large ones. Set in a ring nearly 10 feet wide. Moss-covered but deliberate. In the center, a mound of ashes and blackened wood, as if someone had burned something there recently. Bones? Milo stepped back. "This is a ritual site or something. Who builds this up here?" Callum shook his head. "I don't know. But look." He pointed to one of the stones. It was carved. Roughly. A series of glyphs or symbols, not quite letters, but not random either. Someone had etched them long ago, deep and purposeful. Milo's voice cracked. "This is not normal, Cal. We need help. We should have turned back yesterday." "I know." They both turned at the same time. He was there again. On the slope below. Still closer than before. No sound. No movement. Then Milo noticed something different. "He's bleeding." Callum looked closer. Sure enough, streaks of red now ran down the man's left arm and side. But there was no sign of injury. No wound. Pain on his face. Just red. Is that blood? They backed away from the ring, instinct screaming. The man didn't follow. He just turned his head slightly, left, then right, as if measuring something. Then he knelt in the ashes and began to rub his hands in them. Callum grabbed Milo's arm and pulled him back into the tree. They didn't wait to see what came next. They descended the other side of the ridge, scrambling over roots and down slick slopes. It was nearly dusk. The fog was growing orange, kissed by a dying sun they hadn't seen all day. They found an old utility track, barely visible, maybe once, used by rangers or hunters. It wasn't on their map, but it led down. And that was all they needed. For an hour, they followed it, praying it led somewhere. Finally, lights. Dim, flickering. Through the trees. A house. A real one. Modern. Lights glowing inside. Smoke from a chimney. A car parked out front. Milo almost cried. We're saved. They sprinted the last stretch and banged on the door like maniacs. A woman in her 50s opened it. Startled but not afraid. She listened as they tried to explain. Half sentences. Breathless. Confused. She ushered them in, sat them by the fire, handed them. It's okay now, she said. You're safe. Callum nodded. Tried to breathe. Felt the warmth soak into his bones. Then he looked to the mantel above the fire. A photo frame. The woman. Smiling. Standing in a clearing. Next to her, the barefoot man. Callum stared at the photo for a long moment, not fully registering what he was seeing. Then he blinked. Looked again. The man in the picture wasn't identical, not quite. In the photo, he looked healthier. Smiling. Wearing boots, jeans, a flannel shirt. But the build, the jawline, even the set of the shoulders, it was him. The barefoot man. Milo noticed too. His voice was barely above a whisper. That's him. The woman followed their gaze and smiled, a sad, practiced smile. Yes. That's my son. Luca. She moved past them and straightened the frame. That photo was taken about 4 years ago. Before he changed. Callum's breath caught. Before what happened? She sighed, sitting on a wooden stool near the hearth, hands clasped tight. He was a good boy. Worked in forestry. Knew every trail, every turn in the woods. One day, he didn't come back from a survey trip. To search for him, police, rangers, volunteers. Nothing. Milo sat stiffly. You found him later? She nodded slowly. 3 days later. Naked. Covered in mud. And scratches. He wouldn't speak. Wouldn't eat. Just stood in the trees near the edge of the village. Watching. Callum's skin crawled. Did he recognize you? I think he did. At first. He'd blink, tilt his head, even reach for me once. But it was like something was missing. Something hollowed him out. We took him to a hospital in Mostar. They said catatonia. PTSD. But wasn't that? I know my boy. Something followed him back. Milo's throat was dry. Followed him. She nodded. That forest, it's old. Older than the villages. Older than the names we give it. People whisper about things in the trees. The Watcher, they call it now. But it goes back centuries. Every generation, someone disappears. Sometimes they come back. Changed. The fire popped. A gust of wind rattled the window panes. She looked directly at them. And now you've seen him too. Neither Callum nor Milo responded. The silence was deep. Oppressive. He's not violent, the woman said. Not in the way you think. But he's not human anymore. Not fully. He returns sometimes. To watch. To stand where people can see him. Always just far enough to question what you saw. Milo felt like ice was crawling up his back. Why does he come back? She stood, her expression unreadable. Maybe it's instinct. Or maybe he's looking for something. Or someone. I've come to think maybe he's trying to remember who he was. They stayed the night. Neither slept. By morning, the fog had cleared. The sun was sharp and gold against the treetops, and for the first time in 2 days, they could see the mountains stretching wide like sleeping giants. The woman offered to drive them to the nearest town. But didn't refuse. In the car, Milo sat silently while Callum stared out the window watching the trees pass. Every so often he swore he saw a shape in the shadows, a flicker of movement just off the trail. But when he looked, nothing. She dropped them off at a bus station in Jablanica. Said their goodbyes stiffly. The woman gave them a final warning. If you dream of him, she said, don't follow him in the... He'll be near the trees. Always near the trees. That night, in a small motel, Callum dreamed. He stood in a forest, fog curling around his knees. Luca stood a few feet away. Shirtless. Not moving. Callum didn't approach. He remembered the woman's words. But Luca tilted his head, just a little. Slowly raised one arm. And pointed. Not at Callum. But behind him. Callum turned. There, barely visible in the mist, were other figures. Dozens of them. All barefoot. All silent. Watching. He woke gasping, chest slick with sweat. Milo was awake too. Sitting upright on his cot, eyes wide. You dreamt it too? Milo asked. Callum nodded. They didn't speak of it again. They returned home. Told friends it was a disaster trip, blamed bad weather, rough trails, gear loss. One asked more. Months passed. Milo moved to another city. Callum took a desk job and stopped cycling altogether. But some nights they both still wake up to the image. Bare feet. And something ancient watching from the edge of the woods.